to Freshly Forever, a podcast that gives you fascinating insights week after week. Here's your host, Vi Kumar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode on podcast Freshly Forever. Today I have the pleasure of having here with us Neha Gupta, who's the founder and CEO of College Shortcuts. And her business helps students leverage their potential. So students end up in their dream college, so to speak, with Neha's help and her wonderful team's help. She's a 3-time best-selling author and TEDx speaker. Happy New Year to you, Neha, and welcome to Podcast Freshly Forever.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
Let's begin here with your journey and involvement in guiding students with their college admissions process. What prompted you to do it?
You know, when I started College Shortcuts, this was over 12 years ago, we started first as a tutoring company. So I walked into over 1,000 homes where I was tutoring students one-on-one. And, of course, my students grew up, they got older, and then they started to ask for help with their essays and their applications and not knowing how to package themselves. And so that's where College Shortcuts was born. It was born from one family at a time to now we have a team of multiple consultants on my team, and we work with students all over the US and also globally.
Oh, how nice. Achievement culture, that's something we all seem to be immersed in, right? How can someone embrace the real and be their true self and discover their potential? In fact, you touch upon this in your TED Talk, which is just something so inspiring, and I would encourage everyone to go listen to it.
So the thing about achievement is, and as someone who's been an overachiever or an achievement junkie for a very long time, is that there's not going to be anything outside of yourself that brings you happiness. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the basis of my TEDx talk, that in the end, true happiness lies from within. Now, in terms of when it comes to admissions or students, I overlay that in saying that, hey, we can absolutely help students to unlock their potential, to find their passion. And that purpose can bring a lot of happiness. I think right now we're living in a world of a lot of uncertainty, but also a world that really pushes for achievement above all else. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, of course, I grew up in a family that always said moderation is best, right? So it's great to have achievement. It's great to have goals. It's great to have purpose. But when it is an overness of it or a holic of it, mm-hmm. Anything that's too much isn't great. You feed a kid and you put 20 bars of chocolate in front of them and say, eat all 20, you're going to have a kid throwing up. If you have someone who uses achievement as a way or a scapegoat to experience happiness, they're only going to be left unsatisfied. So mm-hmm. I do feel that there's a balance in terms of our achievement, and really also making sure that we do check in and feel and say, what is it that brings me joy? What is it that brings me happiness? Mm-hmm. And it's not always just work. So we do teach our students a lot about the soft skills, the mental health skills, mm-hmm. Different techniques to really help to reduce the stress and anxiety that exists, that permeates in the academic culture.
Okay. That's just so interesting that you brought up mental health as well. I think that seems to be the very, very basis that everyone should kind of, address and feel good about, opening up and talking about it, right? Like especially living in a pandemic world, that definitely seems highly crucial. So is the answer then to that puzzle, is it an aspect of embracing both joy and the not so happy moments?
Yes. So I think everyone's on their own version of their journey, right? And especially during this time where, if there was ever a time for teenagers to have a coach by their side or to join other students in a group project, it's today. There's no question in my mind that having one-on-one outside mentorship, coaching, working with these students in groups to figure out their passion, helping them with their applications, there's no question that now is a time. There's confusion around the admissions process. There's confusion around how to do things. There's a lot of stress and anxiety. Parents can't get their kids to get extracurriculars in. The stress and anxiety levels are high with virtual versus in person. There's a lot going on right now in terms of change. And with change can come a lot of stress and anxiety. And so we're seeing that mental health has become, the buzzword. And it's not surprising during a time like that. We know that the highest suicide rates are among 13 to 17 years old. And to me, that's something we try to combat at College Shortcuts. We believe that students with the right coaches by their side that are helping them through the process, that are telling them, hey, we're going to apply to multiple schools and where you go is where you go. Mm-hmm. And, when one door closes, 100 doors open, and they don't always have someone by their side really being able to say those types of things or say, hey, those schools are lucky to have you. If they don't have you, they don't deserve you. Mm-hmm. And so having that kind of coaching to reduce the noise of the cutthroatness of this industry helps, in my opinion, with that mental health aspect, because we want to make this journey fun. This is a time where children are leaving their parents' homes into the real world. Mm-hmm. Many times they don't come back. So it's about putting them in the right environment where they're going to thrive. They're going to be around other kids like them. For me, I'm nerdy. I'm a really nerdy person. And I went to schools that were hyper nerdy, and I'm glad I did. Does it make it harder for me in the real world nowadays when people don't want to go deep into intellectual topics or like read about things and want to talk about it? Yes. But it really is about helping kids get into the right environments where they'll be embraced and thriving. High school, I will say, is not always like that. And college is a place where it's supposed to be like that.
So true. And now that you talk about kids entering college, I think it's time ripe to delve into the admissions process. And that's where your expertise comes in. So when should one ideally start to think about college admissions? Is it freshman year of high school, or is it even the last year of middle school, or later? When is it time ripe for them to start thinking about this?
So I think that from what we've seen is that it absolutely should be starting in 8th grade. And the reason why is because if you know that 9th grade onwards, everything counts in terms of grades, academics, extracurriculars, well, you typically want to make sure your 8th grade year is strong. If you walk into 8th grade, you're not having great grades, well, it sets you up to be in certain types of classes for 9th grade. And it's really hard to move into the honors, AP, or high-level classes if you didn't already build those study skills in 8th grade and beyond. So we believe, honestly, can get started as early as possible. And for a lot of parents, just me saying that stresses them out. And I can understand why. You're like, why would I need to start something in 8th grade for something that gets applied in 12th grade? Here's how I like to frame it. When someone is deciding to buy a home, this is not a decision that typically is made within just a year in terms of savings, planning for it, thinking about it. What do you really want it to look like? What do you want it to be? Usually this takes a lot longer in terms of saving for a down payment. Years, usually. Thinking about where you want to live, talking with realtors about the different areas, safety, schools nearby. Same thing goes for college. You're investing, if you're looking at most universities, you're investing upwards of $200,000 in each child's decision. So to think that not starting early of making sure academics are set up well, making sure your kids' mental health is great, making sure they have the right study habits, starting in 9th grade, getting those capstone projects that we do with our students so that they're building out their resume of figuring out what they want to do. The big pandemic I'm trying to kill is the 80% of Americans that hate their jobs. I mean, we're dealing with the great resignation right now where people are like, hold on, life is short. What do I really want to do with my life? Well, if you know your strengths and weaknesses and your personality's pretty formed in high school, not to say people don't flourish and change, but there's a lot of exploration of figuring out, like, do I want to go do this or not? Can I get an internship? Can I try a project out, study this field a little bit and get a sense, is this really what I want to do? Get around other kids. And so our capstone projects have been extremely popular in helping students to stand out on their resume, not look like everyone else doing all the same extracurriculars. I mean, look, yes, going into sports is great. Going into debate is great. Karate, these are great things. But let's get real. As an adult, you're not doing karate later on. Most of you guys aren't really sporty. Really your sport ends up being what you do in life. And so why are we not spending a good amount of time early on figuring out what that major is? In India, when I talk to my parents about this, and parents that know that work with us, they had to decide their major early on. And so America has kind of caught on to that trend. And most universities want to see, what is that angle that you are saying is what you want to do, and how have you showcased it, and what makes you unique? That cannot happen at 11th grade. It has to happen throughout that high school experience, so that when you walk in 11th grade and you're picking your schools, 12th grade really doesn't count. Okay. So really we're talking about a 3-year high school experience. How are you going to package that, showcase that's what you want to do? So I truly believe that planning, starting early, it's just the name of the game. If you want the least stressed out teenager, the most enjoyable experience with your kid through high school.
Yeah, and a great analogy there, that none of these can be overnight decisions, right? So it does call for a lot of planning, and especially with finance involved, like you said, at least $200,000 over a 4 years time span.
A lot of money.
That is definitely something to think about much earlier than 11th hour. So,
and I'll tell you, we've decided moving forward as of this year, we are no longer taking last minute clients. Last year was the last year we were going to do that. We heard from so many families that were waiting till senior year, missing the deadlines for early decision, early action. And the level of stress was not worth it, wasn't worth what they paid. And we found that the results that we get are far beyond higher. 10, 15, 20, 30% increases are allowed into the admissions process just by applying early. So again, we are all about reducing stress and anxiety and starting early in the process. So yeah, that's my motto in life in so many ways.
I guess, yeah. Well said, as far as, your vision and what you try to do. But again, from the student standpoint and from families, like wanting to be successful, I think it certainly helps to plan ahead. And as a parent that has sent a kid to college very recently, I can attest to that.
Awesome.
Tours and such, coming up with a bucket list of your schools that one needs to focus on to achieve your best fit, so to speak. What would you say? Would that be core specialty that the school offers? Would it be student safety aspect, class size, full-time professors? What is it that helps you nail down your bucket list?
Great question. So when it comes to building the school list, especially where admissions rates have completely plummeted due to the pandemic, with more students applying, there are a myriad of factors. I want to hit early on my earlier point about starting early. For families that are listening, that are in 11th grade or are in 9th or 10th grade and feeling like, oh my God, I'm late, it doesn't mean you can't reach out to us. We'll still help. I'm talking about the families that are like 2 weeks before deadline. That's the kind of stuff we just don't do anymore. Now, in terms of building the school list, we talk about having a well-balanced list. Again, moderation. On average, right now, we're seeing that most students are applying to a minimum of 10 schools, upwards of 15, sometimes higher. But that's typically what we're seeing in admissions. And that's because, again, if they're applying to reach schools, even if they're a fit for it, right now, there's no sense of like, oh, just because you fit into the stats of a Rice, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, doesn't mean that is not a reach school. It's going to be a reach school no matter who you are. This is coming from someone who was like,
rates also kind of play in and weigh in.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. So in terms of building a list, it really does come down to lots of factors. We have some students that are now at a point where they're like, we don't want to go to certain states because of their political views. That's a new one coming up. We have some, of course, that are all about the weather. They want to be in California, Florida, right? They want the beach. We've got some that are all about a certain major and they found that specific specialty and they want to go into that major. So they're trying to make sure that they are focusing in on it and doing those types of things. So that's a big one too. I think it really boils down to, where's the student really going to feel happy? The types of students that are like them that are there, is it the right fit? So really getting a sense of, and we have a portal actually that students use that pull all the data, all the reports of like the stats, but it also lets students know, like from, videos and things like that, of what are these types of schools and what are the types of kids that go there? What's the culture that your child is about to go into? A school can look great on a brochure. You don't really know until you're immersed in the experience. And so we really believe in immersion. I'll share, I thought I wanted to go to California for college because, I wanted to be a hip hop dancer. And my mom was like, I remember my mom being like, you are not going to live in LA and you are not going to be a hip hop dancer. You need to focus on your studies. And I was a top dancer out of Houston. I at one point got to halftime dance at the Rockets game. I was very talented. I was at a very high level of dance. Anyways, I go out to California to visit this school. I'm not going to name the school. So it's a good school, but the culture of it was so not me. And I remember coming and visiting, seeing the students, talking with a few, going to a class or two. And that day I was like, Mom, I'm not ready to leave. This is not the culture I'm ready for. Now, fast forward, a bunch of years later, funny enough, I do end up living in LA for a little bit of time and I do end up doing hip hop dance. So my mom couldn't end up stopping me. So when a teenager has a dream, by the way, as parents, unfortunately, it may have to come true at some point in their life. So get ready for that. But
that's someone's passion. So
right. It totally is. So so I ended up realizing when I visited that like, oh, it looked great on paper and I liked the concept, but it really wasn't for me. So visiting is very important, in my opinion. This is where students had it really hard early in the pandemic. They couldn't visit. Now I think it's more open, right? So visiting the campus, getting a feel, doing your due diligence of what matters to you. What are your deal breakers? What are your non-negotiables? What do you want to feel while you're there? These are the types of things you really want to look at, because if you're not happy there, it doesn't matter if they give you the right major or program, right? Really is about that
scholarship money. You're still not going to, you have to feel at home where you want to be. I mean, I remember we visited a few schools because, like you said, in a pandemic year, it was so difficult. And my daughter happened to fall right into that bracket and got into that trap where, it was a pandemic year and things were so hard to do. But then there was this one school where we heard her say, I can see myself here. So I guess, what truly they feel, and it's a sense of comfort for someone, being in that environment, that matters a lot, right? It's not just about, we say, don't judge a book by its cover, but, so it's almost similar to what you said, with that analogy and a brochure just portraying, what it is about the school. One has to feel part of it.
And I'll say one of the biggest things that's happening since the pandemic, and what I would almost say is kind of the biggest scandal really happening in admissions that has been quite a challenge, is that, what we're seeing right now is that after the pandemic happened, all of the admissions rates plummeted. When you have schools that are now deciding not to take the SAT or ACT, where students are now applying in thousands and hundreds of thousands, it creates a situation where you have more applications, you're keeping the spots at a certain level, and so your admissions rates get lower and lower. The lower your admissions rates are, the more competitive and prestigious you are considered on the US News World and ranking. And so colleges are continually now saying, we don't need the SAT or ACT because it benefits them if they have higher numbers of applications coming in. And then it makes their admissions rates, for some colleges right now, it's as low as 3%, right? And this is the real problem right now, is that we're seeing that, and we all know that, inside almost every college is charging $50 to $75 per application. So they're getting $3 to $4 million in just application fees for reviewing these applications. So to me, I really believe that picking based off a ranking list, is, like you were saying, is not an effective strategy. Yes, if you have a competitive kid and you want them to go to competitive schools, great. Make sure you visit and check. Is that the type of culture I want my kid to be in? Because those 4 years are going to be some of the most forming years of their life. And so that's why at College Shortcuts, when we help students to build a school list, we ask a lot of questions to make sure that they're picking the right schools that are the right fit for them. And also being clear that it's not just about one school. Yes, one is where you're going to go, but you've got to kind of work through and figure out how many you want to apply to. 10 to 15 is usually what we recommend, keeping it balanced with some reach, some targets, some safeties, and being comfortable with a lot of them as options.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you this really quick. When we talked about tours, when is a good time to start it? Say, if you have siblings, right, from 7th grade, 8th grade, like just kind of put it in your memory somewhere, is that a good thing to do? Or,
so it's funny because I was a younger sibling and I was in 8th grade when my sister was in 11th grade. And my parents seemed to think that those tours that she went on counted for me. And I was like, hello, you've got to do this twice. This is not fair. It's like the second kid always gets the leftovers, right? So what ended up happening was we ended up, so
start, like in 9th grade, when is it?
Yeah. So looking at an 8th grader, let's get real. That's like a kid puberty. They're not going to know. So really it is about 10th and 11th grade are those visits. 12th grade, you're already too late. You should have been doing it earlier.
Okay. So that's regarding the visits. And for someone that doesn't know what they want to major in, and then here we have kids, even after they go into college, they change their major, right? What do you guys do in terms of helping them identify, or do you even do that?
We do. So, again, think about it from the perspective of the industry. If you look at colleges, right now, the average graduation is 5.5 years. This benefits the college because to have an extra year of tuition is not a bad thing, right? So keep that in mind, that not picking a major is technically beneficial in the end because they get paid a lot more for that one student in terms of long-term value. So it is
beneficial to them,
not beneficial to you.
Yeah.
Okay. And most parents that I know wouldn't want to spend $50,000 with their kid trying to figure out what they want to do. That's very expensive, by the way.
Well, hell no.
So we charge a fraction of that for students to do capstone projects. We offer them multiple times through the year where we do group projects together, and students with different passions come together. They learn from each other about their different passions as well. They explore it. They test drive it in a 10-week experience. And then they know, like, oh, I'm interested in this, or no, that's really not what I want to do. So we truly believe in making sure that kids are test driving what their passion is. And that's why we have parents that'll sign up for multiple capstones and different projects. So it stands out on the resume. It doesn't look like every other kid doing karate, Indian dance, tennis, FBLA, HOSA, National Honor Society, all the same things. So the projects help twofold. One, it's the best extracurricular that anyone can add to their resume. Second, it's test driving their passions and interests. And in that way, a student can really get a sense. And that takes some time. It's not like a one-time, okay, I do this one project and I know what I want to do, right? It takes a few times to figure that out. So we do work with students on that because we do feel that, it is a important aspect. And the high school system, I mean, there's no class on it in high school. No one's teaching it.
What about other aspects like study abroad, their career center, the internship opportunities, the career readiness, whatever they offer. How important is all of that in coming to a conclusion on this bucket list? And of course, there's social activities like clubs, and there are other technical clubs and so on and so forth. So what about all those living and learning communities and all these other factors that you would take into account?
So I think first we have to think about it. Most competitive top 25 universities all have study abroad. All of them have career readiness departments. All of them have all of these aspects, right? So if we're talking about, okay, I know that if I go to a top 20 university and if I graduate higher in my class, I will be fed into top internships. I will be selected for top jobs. For example, I went to Rice University. Goldman Sachs was my internship. They offered me a position. It wasn't really a question in the sense that they knew with the Rice stamp of approval on my resume. But here's the kicker that people aren't realizing. It also boils down to how you package yourself, your personality, how you know how to stand out. How do you utilize your experience at the university, realizing it's not supposed to just get handed to you? So these are the other aspects that at College Shortcuts, while we're going through the application process, we're teaching kids this process. That strategy is very important in life. So if you're able to realize that early on and do the right things in high school, then it is very effective later.
Okay.
Back in a moment with our guest on Freshly Forever.
What about testing and application requirements? What is the current landscape as far as that, the ACT, SAT, couple of years, that has been optional. What is the status now? Some are test optional, some are test blind, some are test flexible, right? They need it only for out of state or for a certain major. So what is, where are we in terms of the pandemic and its influence as far as submitting scores versus not submitting? And so what would you say to that as an expert?
So right now, the statistic is about 70% of schools went test optional in the last 2 years. Stanford recently announced again it's going test optional. UC systems are saying we don't need your test scores. So with all of that being said, I don't think it is a bad thing to prep for the SAT and ACT because, again, we don't know if in the next year or two, everyone's going to go back and say, we want the SAT scores. We do know that SAT 2s got completely abolished in the last year. So we know that those tests are now gone, which are the 1-hour subject tests. So that you don't need to worry about. Again, based on my personality type of being a planner, I do believe that if you had a 9th, 10th, 11th grader right now, or 9th and 10th at this point, I would make sure that SAT, ACT prep was there in the backhand. We offer tutoring for that. And we do believe that having that type of help can be helpful. And if they take the test and they do very well, then they can use that score. So even if a school is test optional, but you scored above a 1,500 or above a 1,400, and it's higher than their median acceptance range of their last year's class, well, it's something to boast about and share, So, but here's where it's different. If you are a student that doesn't test well, this is a great time to be applying to a lot of schools. That's what's been happening. So where we grew the fastest, I think this is the award. We were one of the top 100 businesses in Houston to grow in 2020, which most businesses did not grow during that year. It was our craziest year for us. We were number 12 out of 100 top 100 companies. So we saw that the test optional thing made everyone say, wow, let me hire a college consultant, because now we know that the essays are one of the most important factors. Assuming good grades, assuming a good student, if you don't have the right essays now, you don't get in. And so we grew nonstop, and we're continually growing because most families are seeing and knowing and feeling they are looking at the human of that student. What are their essays like? What are their values? What is their character? It doesn't boil down to a 3-hour test anymore.
When schools say they are test optional, but do you think when they actually make their decision that they are truly sticking to that? Because as a parent that had a student who is now a freshman in college, I really had to wonder several times, hey, should we have sent her test score to a particular?
So here it is. Here's my view on it. If you did a test, okay, so let's say University A's median score for admissions was 1420. And let's say the student had a 1450 and above. That student should submit their score. If the student takes a test and got a 1420, 1410 or below, don't submit it. So do I think that they're not looking at the score at all? If it's being submitted and it is a great score, I do think they're looking at it. That's
or
number
in
one.
other cases where all things being equal, they probably look at it.
I think they do take it into a factor because, again, that was a major factor before of what would be put into an acceptance or rejection pile. I also think that the other part that a lot of parents don't realize is that these schools also know many of the high schools they prefer to take students from. They know the students that are successful at their school. So for example, let's say, like my parents sent both me and my sister to private school. Private school tends to be a feeder for top 20 universities. It's just a known fact. There's a certain level of rigor that's at private school that if you're in the top 10%, you're pretty much more competitive than a majority of public schools. Not all public schools. I'm not going to knock all of them. There are some phenomenal ones. We talk with students in, DC, Bay Area. I mean, the types of students that come out of some public schools are incredible. But at the same time, a lot of the private schools are college prep. They help with the polishing of the student, the packaging, the manners, the politeness, all of that is taught. And so they're ready and fresh to fit perfectly into the culture of a top private university. It's just part of kind of that experience, right? So don't get it twisted that these colleges don't have a list of, okay, these are the high schools that we typically accept from. This is the level of what we expect academically from an academic perspective. We know that based on a student's transcript and the types of classes they take, what level of success they're going to have at our university and make us look good when they graduate. So that is an aspect they look at. They also look at, the student body from a demographic perspective. We're seeing there's more females than males in college right now. Woo woo. We're also seeing that there's a diversity requirement for schools as well. So yes, are they looking at a lot of different factors to create their most diverse freshman class? Yes, they are. So, what I think parents should be really focused on is don't stick your kids in all the same extracurriculars that all your friends at the parties are doing. You need to find the uniqueness of something for them to do and not really share it with a bunch of people, and really make sure your kid is doing something with a very unique angle that makes them stand out. The SAT is one little aspect of the admissions process.
Okay. And do you think we talked about diversity? We talked about so many other things, like when you just this last minute, when you said certain things here, do you think that can also change potentially year to year based on, and could that reflect on the admissions decision?
I mean, I think a slight change could occur, but the truth of the matter is, as someone who is South Asian, typically, there and people can read the briefs and everything on the Harvard case. There's a certain cap typically of the number of students they're going to take for these types of universities. So for example, the most competitive race of the competitive majors are students that want to do STEM, so science, technology, engineering, medicine, business, South Asian student applying to top universities. For example, a student applying to a very competitive Ivy that has that as their profile, their acceptance rates are even lower for that specific category. You could try to apply to school that has a 3% acceptance rate, and it actually has a 1% acceptance rate because there's so many kids like you. Now, if that student applied into a different major like psychology, sociology, and then maybe later added on a pre-med or did a different major, they could have a 10 to 11% chance of getting in because they're different based on their typical population. So to give you a sense, we work with a lot of competitive students with very specific profiles, and we are still able to get students in because the majority of students that are highly technical, that are trying to apply, tend to be introverted, tend to be shy, do not present well, and do not know how to write in a very emotional, vulnerable, persuasive way.
Yeah, and soft skills definitely, even later on in life when it comes to an application-oriented environment, say like in a workplace, you really have to have that to kind of present yourself as a well-molded and rounded individual, right? So all those certainly play in. And to delve deeper, Neha, into the admissions angle, the decisions, you are an expert in this. And so how can one decipher their originality and present their best self, say when it comes to college essays, and what level of importance does recommendation letters, the resume and such factors, have in the admissions process? And say, how do I present the very best possible case of, okay, any activities and extracurriculars that I'm such an expert at, my unique perspective. How can one bring all this out?
In terms of what it really takes to stand out, a lot of students will focus in heavily in their essays about all this technical jargon or technical stuff, or they regurgitate their resume and it's not interesting. It really boils.
And I meant supporting documents as well. Yes. when I just kind of referred to the whole thing. So just go on.
Yeah.
Give your thoughts.
So in terms of really standing out, it really is about the personality and the style of writing and how you convey what you're talking about. So for example, if you read a book and you read the first 2 pages, you know pretty quickly if you're going to read that book or if you're just going to put it down. The same thing goes for the college admissions essay. You have 650 words on that main essay. You've got a few supplements. That's it. So in those words, you either have the 2 to 3 minutes of being able to really state what it is that makes you unique and different. You can talk about a lot of different things when it comes to the essay, from, extracurriculars you've done, hardships, challenges you've experienced. But it boils down to painting a story through your words and really doing it in a very creative writing way. It needs to feel like it came right out of your journal, a page out of your journal that's very well edited, that says, wow.
So such an impactful account of and a narrative of what your life has been and
totally
how you probably learned from that experience.
Exactly. Right? And it can't be also like the typical topics that a lot of people will cover. Like it can't be about, well, let me put it this way. It has to have an arc to it. If you watch a movie, for example, there's always a hero's journey experience that happens. It's similar with the college essay. It has to have a ending that is positive. It can't be a sad pity story from a challenge and then not showing what was done from that and how you're going to contribute to the university based on that experience. To your other points, yes, the resume is extremely important. It showcases, are you an active contributor to your community, or are you one-dimensional? So that's one aspect. The letters of recommendation are very important. Those give another opinion based on who you are. So all of these, what I call the other sides outside of grades, SAT score, but that other sides has now become more of a main focus since the pandemic, because now colleges are getting tens of thousands, some of which are hundreds of thousands of applicants, that they can now cherry pick and decide, okay, you know what? I want that South Asian kid who loves engineering, but he also wrote this really cool essay about how he learned about precision through cooking, but also the power of intuition. That kid's unique versus, oh, there's that kid again who loves to do computer science and engineering, who wrote about how his dad was an engineer and how he liked to play Legos as a kid. Oh, wait, everybody likes Legos, right? So this is what I'm talking about, these nuances of pulling out what is going to be the best story and the best experience to really showcase your personality. That really makes a big difference in admission.
Okay, fantastic. What about?
And one more thing, sorry. To be very honest, most parents that have technical fields cannot write like this.
I guess I always had this view that it's best for the parent to stay as much away from the scene as possible, because time and time again, you get to hear that college counselors, can tell whether an essay has been self-written or has been, spearheaded by someone else.
Yes.
So how in the world you get a balance of like stepping back, but then still guiding, versus someone going to the point of thrusting their views and that coming out in the form of that kid submitting their essay?
Our essay team is very focused on keeping the student's voice, keeping the student's story. What we do is we help to ensure that it has the right admissions angle to it. And that's where our expertise really lies. So a lot of parents may think like, oh, this is a really great essay that my kid wrote, when they read it on their own, when they don't work with us. And then we read the essay and we're like, that's a great essay. It just won't get you in where you're trying to go. And a lot of parents have a hard time with that. But again, it's because they're not going through 50,000 essays, seeing what it looks like.
True. But how is it that you help the narrative come out, even the topic of significance that a child should write or a teenager should come out with? How do you help bring out the narrative?
Yeah. So when we work with our students, we work with them one-on-one to discuss what are all of the different stories that they could write about. We learn all about the different things that they've been through. We have a very detailed way of doing that. And then based on their experiences in life, plus where they're looking at, we then cherry pick it based on the topics of which application essays they're filling out.
Okay. And as far as the application process, would you say the Ivy League versus non-Ivy League, and then private versus public in general? How should people go about the process?
I mean, I think the best way to look at this is that the process is the same. You need the student, you need essays, you need the resume, you need the transcript, right? Like all the foundational pieces are there for the common application. Now, when it comes to more competitive schools, like, Ivies, you may have like 5 to 10 different essay responses. That's where it gets harder to do. On average, when a student works with us, like if a student does 15 applications with us, they're typically doing upwards of 52 essays with us. That's a lot of essays that they're working on. So yes, is there a difference in terms of the amount of work that's required? Yes. But the foundation of creating a very powerful foundational application is the same for all types of universities. Where it gets nuanced is in the essay process, where we shift things and change things based on the university, the questions that are being asked, and those types of things is where it becomes specific. Kind of like, my mom was teaching me Punjabi style gobi has onions and tomatoes in it, right? But she's like, we don't put onions and tomatoes in ours, so, right. So there's going to be different flavors of how things are done depending on which university and the level of competitiveness that's going on with that school.
Okay. And for anyone listening, I don't want them to feel super overwhelmed because the college process itself is overwhelming. When you say 52, you meant inclusive of all the supplemental stuff and everything that they may write for different colleges put together, and especially when you consider 10 or 15 applications in the mix, correct?
Yeah. So when we're working with students for 10 schools of applications, we're looking at roughly 20 to 30 essays. On a 15 school package, we typically see students working on about 40 to 50 different essays. Again, keep in mind, schools like Stanford have upwards of 8 to 10 responses. Rice has 4 essays. UC has 4 essays, right? Like we have this all in our heads, obviously, as well, this is all we do all day and all night, right? So when a parent comes in, sometimes they'll say, oh, but isn't it just the Common App and 1 essay and you just submit it all? I'm like, oh, if it was that easy, I mean, that would be so great, but it's not. They want to see, why do you want to go here? Write a letter to your roommate. Tell us what you would say to him to let him know a little bit about you. These really cool essay prompts. What is an extracurricular you love? What do you like to do when you have free time and you don't have to do something? So these are all different types of essays that are supplemental that they look at. Rice has a box. Ever since I applied, it's a box and you get to fill in that box with whatever you want. It's a creative box. Mm-hmm. So these are a lot of different prompts that they're working on. So yes, is it overwhelming if you're trying to do it all on your own and if you're waiting till last minute? Absolutely. But for our students, for example, right now, we're getting started in January for an August 1st application open. So they're going to work with us for the next few months. They'll do the essay process with us over the summer, and then boom, they get to apply and enjoy their senior year. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can actually really enjoy this self-discovery, the ability to come out with your stories and enjoy that experience in a beautiful way, and then feel really confident when you apply to each school that you were really deliberate and intentional with each essay that you worked on.
Okay, perfect. What about the much talked about course rigor? And some say colleges look at course rigor and then, okay, is it my prerogative to choose how my school is laid out in my community? Because a lot of people cannot afford to go to private schools. And for those that can bank on wherever they are living, but they are willing to put their best foot forward and work hard, how can you just demonstrate that you have undertaken that rigor or the so-called rigor that colleges expect? And that is one. And the second would be, some have this opinion that when colleges look at online classes versus in-person classes, do they tend to view it as, okay, it's less of a rigor that somebody did this online, because online, a lot of people have this opinion, right or wrong, I don't know, that it's meant to be easier. How would you answer? I mean, I know it's not easy because I can see your expression, Neha, and I completely agree with you. I know I have raised a child that has had a good mix of both, because she is a tennis player and she's still playing for her school. But I can completely relate to your expression there. But this is a podcast and people get to see the audio or hear the audio only. So how would you answer that?
So when it comes to academic rigor, as someone who was in the top of my private school, and then when I went to Rice, I was then among all of the other top students. It was so hard. Even being an all A, all honors, all AP student, when you go to college and if you go to a competitive school, you're no longer the top wearing your cute uniform or your cool school shoes in high school thinking you're the coolest kid. Well, nerdy is
not the creme de la creme anymore.
Right. You're not the creme de la creme anymore, actually. You're now with the creme de la creme. So your game has to actually change, because you're like, oh my God, y'all are all just as smart as I am. Like, they are brilliant kids that get into those schools. So does academic rigor at a high school level absolutely play into admissions? Yes, and it should. You do not want your kid going to get into a top university, calling mommy and saying, hey, I'm making Fs. This is really hard. Because they picked the wrong school based on their academic rigor capabilities and their level of willingness to work hard and make the grades that need to happen. Okay. So I'm a big believer that academic rigor does matter. Now, like I said, a majority of the students I work with are public school students that are really smart. So it's not to say that public school students don't have very hard classes when they take IB and AP. Now, most parents say, okay, Neha, should we put our kids in all these classes or not? My response is, you know how smart your kid is or how not smart they are. I can't answer that question. Should you be putting your kid into harder classes if you want them to get into a more competitive school? Yes, simple answer. But if it requires them to have like 8 hours of tutoring to get the A, and they're stressed out and miserable and gain weight and hate you, no, it's not worth it probably. They're not sharp enough for that class. It's okay. You're going to live. So it just depends on what your child is really good at versus what they're not good at, and really being able to assess that early on.
What about the online classes versus in person? Does that matter?
So after the pandemic, there was a lot that happened in terms of online and in person. And all of us feel that online was way harder than in person. So that view that, oh, if you take an online class, it's easier. No, it's self-study most of the time, which means it requires even more determination and motivation to finish and do well.
Okay. And the AP and the IB. What about kids that cannot do AP and IB? Is there a school for everyone? And okay, when we talked about this achievement culture earlier, does that mean kids who are not able to step up to that level of AP and IB, will colleges ignore them because of that? Or can they show their expertise in something else? Because I always had this opinion that every child is unique and every child has this potential to be their best self. If they are not, okay, a straight A student, they are probably something else, or they are a good mix of both. That's where I guess the hybrid comes in. So what is your take on that, Neha?
So I feel that, when it comes to if a student cannot take AP and IB because it's not at their school, there's always options to take it outside of school or to take college level classes. Now, if it's a student that's not academically intense, that's okay too. There is over 200 colleges across this United States. It's not just the top 20 for that student. And we help students all the time get tons of scholarship, go to a state school, go to a different type of school, and they thrive and do a great job. They have a great time. They get great jobs after. They get married, have kids, and they're very happy. So again, I do believe there is a right college for every student based on where they're at.
Okay, perfect. And
Yes.
there is also this scenario where a candidate has a great GPA, good SAT score, has extracurricular activities, but still doesn't seem to make the cut with the top schools. So what is it that happens there in the admission process? And what about international students? I know we just have to probably wrap up very soon, but what about those?
So obviously we know international students, it's a more competitive round. It's also more expensive. And so that process, again, they still are looking at a lot of the same factors that I discussed earlier. To your second point, remind me what the second question was?
Say a candidate has a great GPA, good SAT scores, has extracurriculars, but still say a school like, okay, Rice University or some other school, say Stanford doesn't take them or a UC doesn't take them. What happens there?
Well, again, they can't admit everybody. So that's why having a very solid, well-balanced list, having multiple universities, keeping all your options open makes a big difference. So you can still have a solid application in terms of grades, extracurriculars, but if that essay isn't written well and, the interview may have not been done properly, then yes, there are other universities that will find that student attractive. So we haven't seen anything where a student gets rejected from every single school they apply to. Again, that's never happened in the history of college shortcuts. So, it is, you have to think about it with the 3% acceptance rate at some of these very, very competitive schools. You do have to realize that when you're going into it, that, hey, I may not get it and that's okay. But there's these other universities that are just as great, that are going to be awesome and we happy at, and it's going to be a really wonderful experience.
Okay. Early decision, early action, regular decision. What is your advice to?
Only early decision, only early action. You're talking to a planner here. And if you want to Google it, guys, look at the stats. You'll see the increase of probability of getting in is significantly higher than regular decision.
Okay, so early action it is. And what about private versus public and scholarship opportunities, like what is your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, on average, when students work with us, we've seen between 20,000 to 150,000 in scholarships across a 10-school list. We do work with partnerships on helping students with FAFSA and the scholarship process. Again, if your application is not strong, they're not going to give you scholarships. If you have a really great application and you are above average of what the students are, we've gotten students full rides at universities all the time. So scholarships are out there, they're available, and schools are wanting to give them to students that are hyper driven or are going to be great on their university campus.
Okay, so as long as one can present their very best self, even a private school is reachable because there are scholarships that are out there that can be grabbed. Okay, and your books, your role in the community and outlook for the future, Neha.
Yeah, so I really believe that the college admissions process, now that I've been doing this for 12 years here at College Shortcuts, this is what I want to leave everyone with. I believe that while the admissions process has gotten more competitive, it's also gotten more human, meaning they're looking at your child's values, who they are as a person, what it is that really makes them unique and stand out, and their soft skills. And so I really urge people, anyone that's listening that's interested in learning more about College Shortcuts, or maybe has a friend or a mom that they know or a dad that they know that has a high school student that could really get help, feel free to book a free consultation call with us at collegeshortcuts.com. We'd be more than happy to talk with you and learn about your family and see if we're a good fit together. We've decided to really go exclusive, work with a certain number of families now moving from year to year, because we found that we want to spend a lot of quality time with our families. And we believe with the right coaching and the right type of help that we can really reduce everyone's anxiety and stress around admissions, make this enjoyable, and make sure parents are really excited about sending their kids to college.
Okay. And if there's one thought you would let international students focus on and one for people here in the US, what would that be?
In the US, it's all about standing out, being unique. For my international students, it really is about making sure you know how to package yourself well, and ensure that your application is very much a standout application. I'd say it's actually the same for both.
Okay. And you do help international students, like we all live in a virtual world, and so
of course
you are reachable. Yeah. And I just wanted to emphasize here, and correct me if anything is wrong, I believe you fund a student in Africa for every student that you work with, and your goal is to impact 1 million lives and build 100 schools by 2030. Is that right?
That's right. And we also launched Dream Life Foundation, which is our nonprofit arm as well, that also is expanding on teaching teenagers the skills they need to succeed in life outside of just the admissions process.
Okay. So much fun talking to you, Neha, on the college admissions
You too.
Process and unfolding this never-ending mystery with the process. And I hope students and parents listening all across the globe, we have over 70 countries and over 1,250 cities in all 6 continents tuning into this podcast. And I hope everyone can benefit from it and from your expertise. Thank you so much for joining us on this show. You have a great one.
Thanks so much.
And to listeners, thanks so much for tuning in week after week. Follow me on Instagram at YP and for the podcast at Freshly Forever for constant updates. I will see you back again with yet another guest and yet another interesting topic. Until then, it's Vi saying so long.